Okay, good afternoon, everybody. I hope you can hear me well. Okay, terrific. I think we have some other people trickling in here. I've been promised we'll have an hour, despite the fact that we're starting a bit late. So Shruti over here is going to help me to keep time. But I wanted to just introduce the session. I'm a very accidental academic, so please bear with me. I'm completely disorganized most of the time. My mother says, you didn't teach that in PhD school, did you, to be organized? Okay, so here we go. The Relentless Ocean Winds is the name of the panel this afternoon. And our panelists are, I'll just start here, Johary Ravaloson,
Hello,
MG
everyone.
Vassanji, and Shubhangi Swarup. I'm not going to read their bios because that would take up too much time, and we want to get right into the heart of this conversation. But you will all have the bios and the information in the program, which I think will more than adequately explain these fantastic authors. And my honor in sitting on the stage with them, I cannot even describe. When I heard from Anya and Yvonne that I was going to be hosting this session, I was just feeling very nervous. And when I started reading their books and rereading some of their books, I was even more nervous. So please bear with me. If I sound a bit breathless, it's because I'm completely awestruck, as I'm sure you will be. Okay. The theme of our panel is shared histories, cultural exchange, and connections. And I thought no better way to begin to explore such connections than to take a few minutes for all of us on the stage and in the audience to turn to our neighbor, our closest neighbor, and tell them your name or names and explain the meaning or meanings of your names and who named you and what any other histories associated with your names. And I'll tell you why in just a minute. But I thought just to get us started, and just because it's the afternoon and everybody wants to have a nap, well, no, you're not going to have a nap in here. So please do that. And I'm also going to ask our panelists to speak to each other about their names. And so please do take a minute to just to turn to your neighbor. Even if you know them, you might be surprised at what you learn. Okay? So I'm going to reach out. I'm going to come over here. We're going to get out. So get started. I'm going to stop you in a couple of minutes. So please do turn to your neighbor, even if you know them, and talk about your names. Maybe you two should have a minute. Okay, thanks. Okay, we got a minute left to this conversation. And then I'm going to turn to some people in the audience who are going to share what they learned about their neighbor. Okay, are we ready? Are we ready? Who's got the audience microphone? Oh, you do. Terrific. Thank you so much. And what is your name?
My name is Chris. Chris.
Chris, but that's not your whole name, is it?
My home name is Odhiambo.
Okay, explain to us what your first and last name mean and where you got them from, Chris.
All right, just right to the complex question. My first name, Chris, I think, because my family is sort of a little bit religious, we subscribe to the Christian religion, and so I think that's why I was called Chris from the overall term Christian. And then Odhiambo in Luo, because I come from the Luo tribe, means the evening, and so I was born in the evening, hence that name.
How beautiful, how beautiful. Thank you, thank you. Okay, anybody else in the audience would like to have a go and share what they learned from their partner? Yes, or someone, their own name. Yeah, I'd love to hear some more names.
Hi, my name is Lachi.
Lachi, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. My new friend, Leah, means elevated, and Kasam is her family name. And then she talked about her pen name, which tends to be mispronounced, but the true pronunciation is, let's see. Yeah, my memory has failed me. Chayu, which means shade.
Lovely, lovely. Alia, tell us about your friend. Yeah, I'd love to hear it.
So, there's only one Lachi in the world.
Okay.
And it's her name, and she gave it to herself. And it's made up of Laura Chebet Rono. And Chebet means born in the afternoon. I was listening to Odhiambo, born in the evening.
Okay.
And Lachi shared something so profound. And it had never struck me. She mentioned how they were talking about naming and relationships, and that you name something when you're in a relationship with something, and how when we come into this earth, we arrive nameless. And that sent us on a whole other tangent.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Alia Lachi. Lovely. I'll take one more. Someone from the back area. Anybody who wants to talk about their name or what they learned about the person next to them? Come on, don't be shy. Okay, over there in the back, I can see you. Keep your hand nice and high so that the person with the microphone can see you. Yep, there, the black and white dress, yes.
Hi, my name is Mo Adhiambo. I was also born in the evening. And my friend here, Sharon Nyambura Anderson. And so we all call her Shaz, Shazi. And she's never really told me why. She's never really gone into her last name, Anderson. And I've always asked her, you don't really look like an Anderson, but that's the name on her ID.
Okay.
So, and I've known Sharon for a couple of years, but she's never really told me why her last name is Anderson, and I hope the day will be today. So, yes. That's it.
Okay, terrific.
Sharon, please stop hiding.
She's hiding. Oh no. Well, thank you very much for sharing your story. I really appreciate that and your name. Okay, so thank you all for participating in this. And hopefully you're now awake and you will know the person beside you. And you will find out whether they were born in the morning or the evening or the afternoon for that matter. But the reason why I wanted to start with names was because in this festival, we've already evoked, as of already last night, the fact that names are really interesting. They are produced through myths, through political and geopolitical processes. Sometimes they appear arbitrary, sometimes they seem purposeful, sometimes they stick, and sometimes they just get erased. And that is very true of what people have already referred to as the Swahili Seas, the Indian Ocean, the Arabian Gulf, whatever you may call it. We certainly are interested in the process of naming. And our authors on the stage have all dealt with, in some way, shape, or form, the issue of naming. And that is certainly a center point of how we connect and how we share or we do not share histories. And I wanted to start with a passage from probably one of the most influential books in my life. And I was speaking to some others, but MG Vassanji's The Gunny Sack, written in 1989. And it really does, it was a pioneering work which really put forward for the first time in fictionalized form, the experience is of communities who moved from Western India or the Western Indian subcontinent to Eastern Africa. So let me just start with a bit of reading with your permission. Okay. Danji Govinji, how much lies buried in a name? Dan, wealth, Govind, the cow herd, butter thief, gopi seducer, dark Krishna. A name as Banya in its aspiration for wealth as Hindu, yet gloriously, unabashedly Muslim. For the esoteric sect of the Shamshis, there was no difference. But Govindji, the elders will now tell you, is not a family name. Where is the Atak, the last name, that can pin you down to your caste, your village, your trade? Absent, dropped by those to whom neither caste nor ancestral village mattered any longer. Later, this irksome Govindji, too, was dropped by one branch of the family and replaced with Hasham. Whence Hasham, an Arab clan name? Thus the past gets buried. But for my drab, my sagging, ugly Sherbanu, from which the dust of karaoke has not been shaken yet. You can place the names of succeeding generations in a column and visualize the crazy dance of history, the logic behind the mad parade of names, from Danji and Samji to Aisha and Farooq, with 100 years jingling between them, each new variation and fashion in name signaling a new era, a new beginning. Yeah. So I wanted to start with, should I call you your name? Can you tell us a little bit about your name? It's on. I think it's on. Yeah, you can. Yeah. Tell us a little bit about your name and your concern with names throughout your novels.
My name is, I go with the name MG Vassanji. That's like not being put into any compartment. It's my grandfather's name. And it also follows the British high school tradition where you were known by your last name. So still, a lot of my friends refer to me by my last name. I refer to them by my last name, but not all of them. So that's what, and my personal name is my personal name. It's not there to be advertised for some, for some cause. No. But I don't know if my voice gets through.
It is getting through. Just bring it closer to your voice.
Okay, yeah. So as I said, my personal name is my personal name. People who are close to me know it. Others don't need to know it. They can just call me by MG, as I'm sometimes called, or Vassanji, and that's about it.
So you have mentioned in this passage, in this first book that you wrote, and in subsequent books, one of the interesting things is that you do have some concerns about names. I'm going to remind you of another passage that you wrote, and I think you will maybe be able to then tell us a little bit about Dar es Salaam, right?
Yes.
Let me just read this quickly. There lived in this town, then called Mizizima, at the place where the sea view now enters like an eagle's beak into the side of the Indian Ocean, a rich Indian merchant called Majigo, whose son Badula was caught in the act with Watatu, the daughter of Kitembe, an elder of the town. And then you go on to describe how the name Dar es Salaam came to be adopted. So you were concerned a lot with these names.
I was not concerned as much as described what was the common story that was told to us about why Dar es Salaam was named. That the Sultan, I think Majid, so nice, peaceful harbor, and he called it Dar es Salaam. And that's about it. I mean, it was what we were told and what we believed. What I discovered later was that the original name Zizima is not dissimilar from Dar es Salaam. Zizima means just a nice town, kind of a healthy town. So, not that far from Dar es Salaam. There were times when people wanted to change it back to Mzizima, but I think that was dropped.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Johary, we've spent a few days together now, and I'll remember the first time you talked to me about your name. Did you want to share with the audience about your name, and then we'll come to the name of your main character in your book? Yeah.
Oui, avec plaisir. Je m'appelle Johary Ravaloson. Ravaloson, c'est le nom de mon père. Il a été le premier nommé comme cela, ça veut dire le 8e, parce qu'il était le 8e petit-fils de son grand-père.
Hello, my name is Johary Ravaloson. Johary Ravaloson. The Ravaloson is the name of my father. It was the first person who had that name, and he was the 8th grandchild of the lineage.
Et mon prénom, c'est mes parents qui me l'ont donné. Johary, c'est un prénom un peu prétentieux, mais c'est eux qui me l'ont donné. Ça veut dire le centre de la création. Alors, en fonction de ce qu'on raconte, ça peut vouloir mentionner les hommes, les humains, ou ça peut vouloir parler du soleil. C'est un peu dur à porter.
And my first name is Johary, and it's a little bit pretentious, but it's my parents who chose it, and it means the center of creation. That can be for humans or for the sun.
Mais je pense que ça va parce que en fait, c'est maintenant un prénom. On pense plus au sens. Je crois que c'est plus terrible pour mon père qui n'avait qu'un nom au départ, donc le 8e petit-fils de son grand-père. Mais quand il est arrivé à l'état civil colonial, l'administrateur civil a demandé « et le prénom ?» La famille a répondu « non, il n'y a pas de prénom en malagasy ». Et l'administrateur civil a regardé le calendrier. Il est né le 18 avril. Et le 18 avril, c'était la Saint-Parfait. Et donc, on l'a appelé Parfait. Et il a dû subir ce prénom dont tout le monde lui rappelle le sens à chaque fois. Alors que pour le mien, maintenant, ce n'est qu'un prénom.
So even though my name is a bit pretentious, nobody really knows what Johary means anymore. So it's not so difficult to wear as a name. But my father, on the other hand, he didn't have a first name. So his name was Ravaloson. But when he needed to go and get registered with the French authorities, they asked for his first name and he didn't have any. So they looked at the calendar, and it was the day on the calendar of a saint, and it was Saint Perfect. So his name in French is Parfait, and everybody reminds him all the time that he's supposed to be perfect.
Thanks. Thank you. In your book, which the one thing I did was forgot to introduce Sonia Fevre. So I apologize for not mentioning your name, who's our translator today, and thank you very much, Sonia, for having agreed to be the translator. But I was thinking about your character, the main character of your book, which in some ways is connected to your own name, the center of the universe. So why did you pick ESC as the name of the character, and how does it connect then to the found? Okay, we're back. So I was saying that the character in your novel, can we just hold it up so that people can see which the book is called? Yeah, The Return to the Enchanted Island, all right? And in it there is a character who shares a name with a mythical character from the origin story of Madagascar. So maybe you could just tell us a little bit about the character and how that story connects to this mythical space, which is the place of Madagascar.
Thank you. Alors, le personnage de mon livre s'appelle Yeti Razak. Razak, c'est un nom commun c'est un patronyme. Mais ce qui m'a intéressé dans ce nom, c'est le prénom Yetse, qui est en fait le premier homme dans nos contes traditionnels. C'est un peu en quelque sorte notre Adam pour les chrétiens qui connaissent Adam et Ève. Alors à Madagascar, le premier homme s'appelle pas Adam, il s'appelle Yetse.
So my character is called Yetse Razak, and Razak is a very
En même temps un créateur, un artiste. Et le Yetse du personnage, donc hérité de ce nom du grand ancêtre, il a peut-être aussi hérité de sa solitude première. Et en fait, mon livre parle de comment échapper à la solitude. Alors le mythe, c'est la création. Pour Yetse, c'était un peu difficile pour lui pour trouver sa voie. Et pour sortir de la solitude, il lui fallait en fait reconnaître l'existence des autres. En fait, c'est un peu comme Yetse, le personnage, c'est un peu comme un enfant qui considère les autres, notamment ses parents, comme des extensions de lui-même. Et donc, pour sortir de sa solitude, il lui fallait accepter l'existence des autres comme indépendamment de lui.
So, to translate the meaning of the mythical character to my own character, well, he shares the same loneliness as Yetse, and he's trying to escape that loneliness, and the novel explores that path, that he needs to find his own way in order to escape this loneliness. And the condition in which he starts is a bit like a child, whereby he sees others as an extension of himself, particularly his parents. So he's on a journey where he needs to accept that they are different from him.
Oui, et c'est un peu aussi la condition de l'auteur, je pense, pour qu'un livre puisse exister, enfin c'est mon avis, il faut que l'auteur accepte la liberté de ses personnages. Et c'est toujours la gageure, lorsque j'écris, d'accepter que les personnages existent en soi, faire en sorte que les personnages existent en soi, et que l'auteur, en fait, doit laisser ses personnages libres pour que le livre existe vraiment.
And so as an author, I feel the same way about my characters, that the book must exist on its own, and I need to let my characters be free. And for the book to really exist, then I have to accept that my characters will live separately from myself as an author.
Thank you, merci. Shubhangi, I wanted to come to you. Names take on a really important role in your book, Latitudes of Longing. And as I said to you, it is an incredible read. And I think that anybody who can make Ammonites sing in different and dance in different ways is really, really amazing.
Thank you.
But tell us about names. We talked a little bit about this before, about how names of places and things matter to you in terms of how you talk about naming as a process, not just naming characters, but naming things, places, fault lines, valleys, rivers, etc.
Oh, I take naming very seriously, seriously as the process of writing itself. So it has so many layers to it. In the beginning, I have a character who is a British lord who likes to name. And so he keeps going to not undiscovered, but he keeps going to new places in the British Empire so he can, as I say, unleash his, unimaginative self onto different landscapes. So he gives names like Breakfast Bay, Crumpetpur, to some of the places in the Andaman Islands. So that is one aspect of it. And I remember there's a line where, through the childish act of naming, he comes close, through the childish act of naming, he comes close to, the creator himself, something like that. I should find that line, where even as a writer, I started with, oh, let's have fun with this naming and characters, but somewhere it brings you closer to so many layers of various kinds of truths. Later on, the act of naming goes on to geology, as we were discussing. Some of the names given to time and eons and epochs are also such a crucial aspect of colonization. Names like Ordovician, Devonian, which are restricted to small tribes that existed in England. So in my book, character decides to rename them based on the tribes around him. And this is where fiction gives us little powers to reimagine the world in different ways. And there is a power that even I had to use to protect myself. I live right now in a climate where it is easy to offend someone and it is dangerous. It's not just, oh, I don't like what you're doing. There are serious ramifications. So though it started in this disarming way, I also learned to rename a lot of real places and historical figures that I refer to protect myself. So it's taken on many layers.
Yeah, no, I think that this is obviously a climate that we are all experiencing in different ways. And I wanted to turn to you, Vassanji, because that's the way you want to be. And just can you read that introduction section from your book? Because I think it starts to kind of open up this question about how do we name things in the present day and how are we named? And in typical anthropological speak, we talk about these things as identity and identification, because names do play that role. How we are identified. Your parents said you were born in the evening, so you adopt that persona, or not. And you might adopt a name for yourself, which we heard about there as well. So I'll turn it over to you to read that first section of your book.
Hello?
You may want to just bring it closer to your... Yep.
Yeah, it has to do with departure and responsibility and guilt. But I don't see the connection with any name, to be honest. And this has to do with having left my hometown, Dar es Salaam in Tanzania, with all the intention of going back to do something, and then not having been able to do it for various reasons, one of them being purely cowardice. It has haunted me for a very long time till today. Having just returned from Dar es Salaam and seeing that it is really home, at least one home. So I began my book about belonging and identity, because identity is something that is on your passport. It is on the form you fill for the government, and you say, I'm male, I am gay, I am, of this race, and so on. But belonging is what's in your heart, and no one can take that away from you. No government, no immigration officer, and no policeman. It's what you know, what you are. So this is how I began my introduction to this book on identity and belonging, which is called Nowhere Exactly, because people like me then find themselves neither here nor there, and they cannot be pinned down. Ever since, just out of my teens, I left my hometown, Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, to study abroad. I have carried within me a profound sense of loss and uncertainty regarding who I was, where I had come from, and what I had become. I recall telling myself during my first weeks on this continent, which was America, don't forget. As the months and years went by, I could not escape the feeling that I belonged to more places than one, with a resultant uneasy sense of guilt and betrayal. Memory, personal and familial, historical and ancestral, of the old and the recent, was stretching me out across continents and cultures. In Toronto now, I feel completely at home. And yet, whenever I set foot on the ground in Dar es Salaam, there's a spring in my step, a lift in my spirit, my language, my tone, my relationships with people are different. There is a sense of ease. Have I been disloyal to Tanzania, choosing to stay away when I had left it with a vow to return and contribute to this developing nation that nurtured me? There was a time not long ago when the answers to both these questions would have been strongly in the affirmative. For long, I was nagged by this doubt about my honesty, professing one thing while harboring qualifiers. But the passing decades have presented me with two ameliorative viewpoints, healing thoughts. So I won't go into the healing thoughts now.
So this book of essays, which has just been published, explores quite profoundly, in my sense, identity is about naming. It's about how you are named. And you mentioned how your passport carries all this information, but it's not about belonging and your sense of belonging in two places. And I think one of the areas in the book which I found profoundly moving was kind of and I'll parse this because I wouldn't be able to find the exact words and be as eloquent as you are, but to say, why can't I have two loves? Two equally, what prevents us from being people who have multiple identities, places of belonging. And I think that this is a really an important question. In the last panel, they were talking about global citizenship as a kind of a modern conception of a multiple sense of belonging. And there were lots of questions about this, but I think you've turned it to a kind of a personal question. Could you explain a little bit more about this idea of the two loves? Like, who is preventing you and who has historically prevented us from thinking about ourselves as duly located or multiply located?
Well, and I think in Africa, in East Africa, Kenya and Tanzania especially, after independence, they would ask us, so you decide, are you British, are you African, or are you Asian? And the Indians, Gujaratis of those times being, basically cowards, frightened. They would start shaking. And all they had to do was to say, it's no business of yours. I am what I am. And it's only now that I think people, after 50 years, we can say, look, this is what I am. I'm Asian, I'm African, and I'm an American or a Canadian or something else, or I'm nobody. But I think to get to a point of global citizenship, I think there is a cop-out, because it takes no responsibility at all to say I belong everywhere. But what does this mean? Because I met some people a few months ago, and they read the book, and they said, what, we belong everywhere. And I said, there's something that has to stir you, that this is your air. When I step foot in Dar es Salaam, I can smell the air. When I arrive in Kenya, in Nairobi, nowadays it has changed a bit, the airport, but you move away from the airport a little bit and you can smell the cold air and the smoke. And this is also home. And that, I think, is what belonging means,
Shubhangi, what are your thoughts about this? In your book, you are really exploring from the Andaman Islands all the way to the Himalayas, people who live along this incredible unseen fault line. And what's your experience of belonging, and how do you think about it in terms of your own place in this series of cracks and fissures and overlaid with histories of geopolitics and so on? I mean, do you see yourself as a global citizen, or do you see yourself really firmly rooted, or are these questions that you are still trying to consider? And is your fiction allowing you to think through those?
To be honest, I got so lost listening to Vassanji that I forgot I was, a panelist too. Yes, because, the idea of home took me to humidity immediately. For me, Bombay has a very high humidity, and Goa, and it just struck me that is an emotion. It's a sensation, and we don't come to it intellectually probably. And a lot of these exercises, especially that young writers or writers at the starting of their career, we try to, build lofty processes to find these answers. In my case, I'm very critical of being restricted by my political borders. And especially since they are so whimsical and they are so young, they are kind of unreliable, to work with. So I set my stories on a tectonic fault line. And through this exercise, once again, fiction, I approach fiction in this playful manner, and somewhere I reach these big realizations without knowing I was seeking them. And while researching geology and the Himalayas and the Indian Ocean, the Andaman Sea, I realized that I'm seeking my place in a much larger history, the deeper history of the planet and nature, and my place in this beautiful universe, where do I fit in regards to the stars, the sun, everything. And I find that the current political way of looking at it doesn't satisfy that question. Increasingly, I say I'm a writer of the subcontinent and not an Indian writer, because that feels a little more honest. The Himalayas have shaped our lives in a way that borders can't even, aspire towards. And so have our coasts. So the subcontinent feels a little more honest.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned in the last panel when we were also talking, and I wanted to turn to Johary also, is that this fault line has separated in a deep time way Madagascar from the coast of Goa and Bombay where you live, and this tear, this fissure has been much more profound in terms of your experience. And I wanted you to just expand on that a little bit, because I wanted Johary to say, because part of the task of this panel is to think about shared histories, but where does history start and where does it end?
And who does it include? You know, I mean, as human beings, we look at the subaltern as also within our species. But something, I always bring it in is, who does it belong to? What is natural history? Like we've, really like hyphenated the different kinds of histories exist. There's natural history, there's deep time, there's human history, political history, social. But is there a larger way of accommodating all these strains? Is there a way that connects me to the larger forces, maybe the forces of nature also at play? So if I look at life that way, then I have always lived in the Western Ghats, which, as I told you, is a rip in the land, and it ripped off from Madagascar, whatever, 15, 20 million years ago. And, there's an interesting thing. We discovered this purple blind frog like 15 years ago, and the scientists said that, we've discovered a new species and its closest relative is in Madagascar. And that's because, this sweet little frog has probably carried on since then, through the whole, it's been around even before the Himalayas, basically, right, and the Indian Ocean. And, but do we consider them citizens too? Who do they belong to? They sort of link me to this larger process of belonging, and make me question it.
Yeah. Johary, maybe you could read that section from the book which is marked myth, because it's about the myth of Madagascar, and I think it's beautifully written, and we can just then talk a little bit about this other side of the Indian Ocean and, Swahili seas, Madagascan waterways in terms
Arabian
of
Sea.
And Arabian Sea, yeah.
Yes.
Car les enfants de la parole violée, peuple originel de la Grande Île, que ce soit ceux des côtes, les Vasimbanjik, ceux des forêts, les Vasimbanal, ceux des montagnes, les Vasimbambouich, ou ceux des eaux, les Vasimbanjan, et plus tard ceux des savanes, les Vazimbatanets, établis là où le grand Yétsi avait sculpté leurs aïeux, étaient perpétuellement trahis par ceux qui, ayant répondu sur le tard à l'appel du grand ancêtre, venaient, toujours plus cupides et sans parole, tenter de s'arroger la terre des Vazimb. Ne parvenant pas à en exterminer les aborigènes, qui poussaient comme de la mauvaise herbe ou plutôt comme du bois béni, les autres s'efforçaient de chercher alliance parmi les enfants d'Yétsi. Alliance, certes par la suite souvent oubliée, sinon répudiée, mais nécessaire, croyait-on, pour hériter de leurs vertus et percer leurs secrets dont on disait qu'en plus de tenir la clé des richesses de l'île, ils recèleraient les mystères de la vie, du souffle primordial.
For the children of the broken vow, the original people of the great island, whether they be those of the coasts, Vazimbanjak of the forests, Vazimbanala of the mountains, Vazimbanbohich or of the waters, Vazimbandran, and later of the savannas, Vazimbantanet, established where the great Yetse had sculpted their ancestors, were all forever betrayed by those who came after belatedly answering the great ancestors' call, more greedy and having made no vows, to seize the land of the Vazimbas. These others, unable to exterminate the natives, who grew like weeds, or rather like sacred wood, endeavored to forge alliances with Yetsi's children. Alliances often later forgotten, if not renounced entirely, but believed necessary to inherit their virtues and uncover their secrets, which were said to contain, in addition to the key to the island's riches, the mysteries of life and of first breath. And the Vazimbas, in accordance with Yetsi's wishes, assimilated and absorbed each new wave of arrivals, trying to release them from their fantastical quests by opening their bastard hearts to them. But love is a difficult thing to understand for those who have not been bathed in it from birth. Feelings of exclusion and disappointment were often accompanied by violence, which ate away at the flesh of land and children, burying still deeper what always could have been within reach.
Thank you. Yes.
Sorry. You know, if to even think that Bombay was connected to Madagascar is like an impossible dream. We are now an island of more than 18 million people. Our rivers are drains. Our air is, what shall I say, it's fatal for us, you know. I fear for my parents living there now because it is impacting our lives. So when I try to look at a different way of perceiving the world and belonging in it, it's also political. I'm reacting to, you know, I just thought that someone may think I'm like, you know, with nature, we have this idea of hippies and let's go hug trees. But some of us have reached there because of experiencing the downfall and the injustice of so many things. So there is, of course, pollution and what we are going through, and the idea of what could we be, who were we before we reached this place. And the other also is, I feel that I'm living in a climate where the right wing always has this particular love for regulating women, and then the whole nation's pride and insecurities come upon their women. So in a way, to reclaim or look at different ways of approaching our identity is a mini act of rebellion in its own way.
Yeah, I'm thinking about, you know, your book, Vassanji, your first book, and I know I keep on harping on it, but it is profoundly, for many of the people in this audience, it is sort of one of the seminal books. But it starts with a woman's secrets. You kind of create this liberation, and almost a kind of a moment of, you know, someone who kept the secrets but also kept the generation. Did you want to talk a little bit about this individual, because it's her sack of things, but oftentimes I want to know, I wish you had written a prequel. How did she arrive at collecting these things, and who was she? Jibai is the name of the character. Yeah.
Well, Jibai was inspired by a woman at the border of Moy Avenue and River Road selling mattresses. But the book, the Ganisak, is just my personal story. As I said, when I left Tanzania, Dar es Salaam, it was with a profound sense of loss. And what was lost was memories, my mother's, my grandmother's, the nations, the mythology, the tribal memories. And I felt burdened by those memories. They just followed me around. So I imagined that a young man, it was a romantic phase, carrying a sack of these memories. So that's how the image came about, a gunny sack of memories. But then, of course, I transformed that into a gunny sack or a gunia of real objects. And each object inspires a memory. And depending on how you pick different parts of the different objects from the sack, you get a different story or a different. But Jibai was the one who told me where my great-grandfather had first arrived. And this was in the town of Kibwezi, a very short distance from Mombasa. And that's, I went to see it after she told me where it was and so on. But I mean, that's the story of Jibai. But it was also, Jibai is also another woman I met in Toronto who sort of related to me through marriage, my sister's in-law. And she was brought to Toronto by her son. I did see for one hour, and she remembered always. She would say, "Oh, Nyerere was my son. He came to my shop," and all kinds of. And she was brought to Tanzania in a little boat, from the ship to the boat, and then on the shore. And when she was about 12 or 13 years old, so she remembered the German period. So from her, I got the stories of the Germans in Tanganyika. So it's just a story of a community.
Where women had a role or continue to have a prominent role?
Women are I think my memories are from my mother.
Yeah.
Of course, my father died when I was very young. But yeah, the stories that she told of her marriage, of her where she was born in Zanzibar and Mombasa and Dar es Salaam and so on, those were from my mother. And I'm talking to many other people. It is the mother who gives the stories.
Yeah, no, I think that's in your book, Shubhangi. You bookend the novel with two different women, in my view, is my reading of it. One is Chanda Devi, who sees ghosts, and the other is just to make sure is Ghazale, who is also, in a sense, a seer of a type. I wanted you to just read a couple of passages because you haven't had a chance, and then I'm going to turn it over to the audience for questions. But just this section here, and then the one that's marked there, I think. Just a little bit of the front. Yeah. Okay. Just to the end of that paragraph, yeah.
If Chanda Devi can see ghosts, transform her beef-eating husband into a vegetarian, and predict crocodile attacks, she can definitely speak to God, the islanders believe. Rumor has it that Girija Prasad is married to a god woman who controls crocodiles and elephants the way she controls her husband. People arrive at her doorstep with fruits and garlands as offerings. A mother-in-law brings in her pregnant daughter-in-law. After the disappointment of 8 granddaughters, she appeals to Chanda Devi to use her divine powers to give her a Kuldeepak, a torch-bearing male, to rescue her lineage. Chanda Devi examines the old lady from chin to toe and from ear to ear. "I'm not the one who's pregnant," the mother-in-law wants to say. "I'm not the problem." But she doesn't. No one can risk the ire of God people. "The Devi has blessed you with all her 9 avatars," Chanda Devi says. "Should you ill-treat any of them, her wrath will know no bounds." "But why must my son work to feed a sonless family, especially this pregnant cow?" You can think of the answer in your next life when you are born as an earthworm. All earthworms are eunuchs. Male, female, it makes no difference to their lives. That's why the goddess makes all those who torture women earthworms in their next life. That night, it is the mother in law who cooks dinner for a change. She serves all her granddaughters and washes their feet as penance. She asks them for forgiveness. She had decided to do so when she stepped out of Chanda Devi's porch to find an earthworm on the slippers she'd left outside, shriveled black under the sun. Thank you.
Yeah, well, we've covered a range of topics. We wanted to read some more passages. There's a fantastic passage in Latitudes of Longing which deals with the myth. And I was thinking that if I were to write an article about some of the author's works on the stage, I would really compare the mythologies between Madagascar, does Canada have mythologies? I don't know. Maybe the indigenous people have mythologies. But certainly, the indigenous people have mythologies. And the ones that you've talked about, this turtle section. But I am now compelled to come back to the audience, having spoken to you at the very beginning about naming. How do you think about names now? How do you think about shared histories, fissured histories, things that the sea has churned up for you, questions about how we think about our contested and shared identities? So people in the audience, please, the floor is yours, and we'd love to hear from you. Questions for the authors about their books. Yeah, there's this question right over here. Terrific. Thanks. Just put your hand nice and high or stand up so the person with the microphone, Chris, can see you, please. Thanks. Okay, terrific. Thank you.
Thank you all. My name is Radha Upadhyaya. This is less a question, more a reflection on these issues of identity. I call myself an Asian African, and I'm most comfortable with that identity because it captures for me what I think I am, Asian and African. I have a 14-year-old son, and it's quite interesting that so I'm going to state the story of how both my mother-in-law and my son both refute this identity. And I don't necessarily agree that we can say that it's none of your business, because a lot of times people like naming themselves and picking a name to show, in a way, the belongings. I feel they're too interrelated. So when I first started this project on the Asian African heritage, and I went to my mother-in-law and I said, okay, this is my name. I think this is what we should call ourselves, Asian African. And she's like, that makes no sense. If tomorrow you were made to stand in a line, an Asian line and an African line, which line would you stand in? And at that time I was like, okay, this woman's just like, this idea of being made to stand in lines, I just thought it was like a bit nonsensical. And then I realized she's come from a colonial era where actually you were made to stand in lines based on your race. So for her, for me to kind of combine these things just made no sense. And then more recently, my son, who's 14 now, but when he was 5 or 6, he struggled with, being a minority in Kenya, to the extent that, when I tell him, no, you're not Indian, you're Kenyan, why are you not? He's like, I'm like, oh, well, you don't have an Indian passport. He actually made himself an Indian passport. And then more recently, a few years ago, the former president Uhuru Kenyatta made the Kenyan Indians a tribe of Kenya. And I found that whole situation very problematic, partly because I didn't know we were not a tribe. I always thought we were part of the census as a tribe. And partly I just didn't think the president had a right to tell us that we're a tribe. But in my son's case, it's probably age as well, but it transformed him. For him, it was like, okay, this is great. Now the government says that we're part of Kenya, so now I belong. So I feel like these are just reflections to say that actually, like just saying, I completely agree, saying I'm a global citizen of the COPAD, but also saying that people don't have a right to ask is also sometimes, I don't think, a way that people can manage, because people do want to know themselves.
Thanks. Thank you, Radha. Hello, I met you many years ago and now I'm meeting you again. Okay, terrific. Did you want to respond to that? Because I think Radha in part was responding to you to say that how do we think about these things given all the colonial, the nationalist, whatever forces, the powers that be actually are asking you to make a choice between these identities. Do you have any thoughts about that? You've been through it yourself, but maybe you have some being African, being Asian, in these.
Give a very current example.
Yeah.
The label here says Canada. What does it mean? I mean, it robs me of all my history, because as I said, I was born in Nairobi, Desai Road, right down the road. My father was born in Voi. My grandfather was born there. I went to school in Dar es Salaam. I grew up in Kairako. All that is lost by this label. And I think it perhaps comes from the politics of this country, that can an Asian not be an African? Because as soon as you go to another place, you are then that. But if you are black, there's something, you would still maintain both identities. Do you? Yeah?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I've got only room now because we've had the opportunity to have for one question, and I can see a person's hand over there. Shruti is signaling me that you don't want to go over time here, despite the fact that we had all these technical problems with the power. I'm pulling an opportunity. Okay, so there's a student at the front. Maybe we should, I'll take two questions very quickly. A question and then a question.
Okay, thank you so much. I'll speak very quickly. My name is Mareike Shumirs. I would like to know a little bit about the beautiful tension between similarity and difference. Because of course, identity can be a brutal thing when it points out difference. It can be brutal when it points out similarity. It's beautiful that the frog of Madagascar is still in India, but it's also beautiful that Madagascar is not India. So I wonder how you deal with this tension and what your mind goes to. Does it go to similarity across mythologies or does it go to difference? Thank you.
That's a great question. I'm going to come to this question and then we'll have one last. There was a young person here who wanted to ask a question and I think I'm going to give the floor to them.
So my question is mainly on the book. So I wanted to ask, how do you name, how did you name the main character and how did they influence how people perceive them and how the naming of your characters in your book influenced and built up the plot? Yeah.
Is that a question for someone specific?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
Sure. So so my understanding is that you wanted to say, how did you...
how does her naming the characters in her book influence how people perceive the character in the book and how does it build up on the plot? Yes.
Did you get that? How do people perceive your characters in the book? And yeah, based on the name. And maybe you can also respond to the other question about the frogs. And then we'll have to call it to a close, but you will have the final word.
Oh, great. I'm so happy someone's interested in this blind purple frog, besides me. To me, it's important to interrogate and ask what helps me connect. Sometimes a difference helps me connect. Sometimes a similarity helps me connect. And I have been raised in a culture where differences are taken to be sacrosanct. Very artificial, man-made differences are taken to be the word of God. So my attempt is to seek what is this universal similarity. It's particular and particular to my upbringing. So when I'm seeking this other frog and what are the differences and similarities, I'm seeking a larger narrative that doesn't indict me in this fatalistic way, what the caste system is. So many identities we carry and we take it as the word of law, the word of God. So I think when I seek these similar strains, I'm not trying to equalize, or what shall I say, whitewash the diversity or the differences, but I'm trying to create a point of connection in places that I saw there were none. I mean, I can't tell you how, what shall I say, refreshing it is for me to find connections in other places than what I'm told. So I'm trying to do that. And do politics impact how we perceive the characters? No, do names, of course. Yes, they are very subtle, what do you call, tools we have of putting them in a particular light. Sometimes the reader goes with us and sometimes the reader rebels and says, nah. So, but the reader has to have some opinion. A name sparks that. It sparks you to sort of interpret something.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Sonia. Thank you, Johary. Thank you, Vassanji. And thank you, Shubhangi, for this panel. And thank you all the audience for staying with us. Really appreciate it. And I'm going to now close the session. And please invite you. I think there's a film later on after this. So please do come to the film session. And wishing you all a lovely evening. Thank you.